Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about Brussels sprouts, which are in season in central PA right now through early to mid-January, probably. I will talk about how to select and store them, how to wash and prep them, how to blanch them and cook them, and provide recipe suggestions as I do in my other seasonably good videos. If you have the option of choosing your sprouts, you'll want to pick ones that don't have any black spots. If you don't have that choice and they come pre-packaged, then make sure that you remove those black spots immediately if you're not going to use them. Don't wash them until you're ready to actually use them, but do remove any black spots to prevent any further decay, and then store them in a plastic bag in the crisper drawer. If they have already been taken off the stock, they'll keep for 7 days if they're stored well. If they're still on the stock, they might keep for longer, but you do want to keep an eye on them. When you are ready to at least blanch them or fully cook them, you'll want to go ahead then and wash them. Make sure that if any black spots have appeared since you last looked at them, you do cut those off. Soak them, as I recommend for all produce, in a solution of vinegar and water for several minutes, and then rinse for 20 to 30 seconds. Any cruciferous vegetables need to be soaked for at least several minutes to help remove anything that might be in those harder to clean spots. If you freeze your Brussels sprouts, just like with broccoli and cauliflower, if you freeze them raw, they will turn bitter. So if you're going to freeze them without actually cooking them, so that you can just pull them out later and cook them, then you'll want to at least blanch them. You can also fully cook them and put them in the freezer already roasted or cooked in something like a stir fry or a soup, just like you would any other vegetable. But if you want to blanch them, the blanching process is similar to broccoli and cauliflower. It will depend on the size of the Brussels sprouts and whether or not you cut them in half. But your blanching time is going to be 3 to 5 minutes based on size, and you'll want to immerse them in cold water for the same amount of time that you cooked them. You can boil them or steam them. I usually steam them. It helps to lock in more of the healthy nutrients and the green color, but you can also boil them if you'd prefer, if you don't have a steamer. And then one other thing I would say before sharing some recipe ideas, I will talk in these recipes about how long you should cook. The same tip goes for cooking as it does for blanching. Depending on the size of the Brussels sprouts, you may want to leave them whole or you may want to cut them in half, and some recipes call for you to cut them in half. If you aren't sure, you can of course blanch them and freeze them whole. It will be harder later to cut them in half if you don't defrost them fully. So if you want to be able to pull them straight from the freezer, you might just go ahead and cut them in half, because halved sprouts work well for most things, but whole sprouts can be harder unless they are those really small sprouts. I'm finding right now that the local ones are coming in a mix of sizes, and so I'll often cut the bigger ones in half and leave the small ones intact. And then they take about the same amount of time to blanch or to cook. These are some Brussels sprouts I got at the farmer's market, and they are all pretty large in size. So I am going to blanch these, and I will just go ahead and cut them in half. That way later I can do what I need to with them, and they'll be easy to just throw into the oven or into a recipe on the stovetop, frozen. These Brussels sprouts also don't have any black spots on them, so I've been able to just store them in a plastic bag since last Friday when I got them, and they've kept really well. So some suggestions of what to do. There are obviously plenty of recipes you can find on the internet and in different kinds of cookbooks. One thing to potentially think about is cooking Brussels sprouts in liquids. I know that The way that I was fed Brussels sprouts for most of my life was to either just have them boiled or steamed with maybe some salt and pepper and some butter. Or in more recent years, I've gotten into the habit of roasting them because they are really good roasted. But if you haven't tried it before, I recommend trying cooking them in liquids. They are actually really good at soaking up the flavor of a soup or other kind of broth. So if you're making a soup, you could go ahead and put those in. They can serve as a good substitute for broccoli or even for cauliflower, but the flavor is going to be similar and the color is similar to broccoli. They're just shaped differently. If you want to go ahead and cook them in liquids, you can cook them for probably 15 to 25 minutes, depending on how big they are. If you have the really small ones or you cut them in half, they probably will only take 15 to 25 minutes in a soup. They might take a little longer if you cook them with meat and you use really large Brussels sprouts. And then you can add them to other things like that have sauces like hot pots and curries and other recipes. Anything that has a kind of broth to it, you could try adding it. They really do soak up the flavor nicely. I don't really eat meat anymore, but in the past when I've roasted chicken and thrown vegetables in to roast with the chicken, Brussels sprouts are one that I have put in with the other vegetables like potatoes and carrots, and they get really nice roasted in the chicken broth. But if you don't eat meat, just like I don't anymore, they are really good in any kind of vegetable-based broth as well. You can also stir fry Brussels sprouts, and there are recipes that you can find for stir frying them. So you can go ahead and look for specific recipes if you'd like. You can also substitute them right now if you have your own favorite stir fries. As I said, they can be a good substitute for broccoli. And now is a good time to try it because they are in season locally. The same thing goes, as I've said before, it really depends on the size of the Brussels sprouts, how long they need to cook, and whether or not you have gone ahead and blanched them or are using frozen Brussels sprouts that you previously blanched compared to raw. That can take a different amount of time. Once they've been blanched, they don't take as long as they do if they're raw. So probably 5 minutes, even for larger pieces of half large sprouts, if you're going to cook them when they've already been blanched. Or if you're going to cook them raw, you might need to think of 7 to 10 minutes for those larger sprouts, even if they're cut in half. But check them after about 5 minutes and see if they're tender, and just keep paying attention because it's going to depend on the size. It's also going to depend on how well they have ripened. Right now, they cook really fast because they are in season locally. But if you're getting them from coming farther away, or if they have not been picked at the right time and they aren't properly ripened, they will take longer, just like anything else. So it really does depend on how ripe the sprouts are and how big they are and whether they've been blanched or not. Another thing you can do is serve them with sauces. Either serve a dipping sauce on the side if you don't necessarily want to cook the sprouts right in a sauce, or you can roast the sprouts or cook them in a pan on the stovetop. There are a lot of sauce recipes you can look for out there, and there are, for example, sriracha honey sauces that are popular with Brussels sprouts. You'll find a lot of those kinds of recipes, but there are plenty of things you can do. If you have a favorite sauce of your own, you can try using that. And what I have here is a recipe for a basic sauce that allows you to vary things according to what's in your pantry and what you like. But you basically, for a pound of Brussels sprouts, just need 2 tablespoons of some kind of sauce, a chili sauce, a barbecue sauce, or some other sauce that you like. You'll want to have a couple of tablespoons of minced garlic, spring onions, or fresh herbs if you like that thing, but it's optional. some soy sauce, tamari, or liquid aminos, and some vinegar, preferably white wine, balsamic, or apple cider or rice. Plain white vinegar, that can be a bit more harsh with the flavor profile, though you can use that if that's what you have on hand. You might want to add just a little bit more maple syrup, honey, or molasses to help to sweeten it a little bit more, if that's the case. But the other kinds of vinegar are a little bit better because they already have a bit of sweetness to them. And then you can add some more hot sauce or chili pepper flakes if you want some heat to it, but you might already be using a sauce that's pretty hot. Chipotle barbecue sauce, for example, already has a lot of heat to it, so you might not need a hot sauce or chili pepper flakes. But if you're using something sweet, like a sweet and sour sauce, you might want something extra. And then salt and pepper to taste, and just whisk all of that together. And then if you're going to roast them, I recommend roasting them at 350, and just toss the Brussels sprouts in your sauce mixture and roast them for 20 minutes or more, depending on how big they are and whether they've been blanched. Check them after probably 10 to 15 minutes and turn them over, and then check them again after another 10 or so and see how they're doing. You can keep checking them every 5-10 minutes till they get to be tender. You can also pan fry them this way. And if you pan fry them, then I recommend sauteing them in some oil first before you mix in the sauce. So just go ahead and saute them for 4 to 5 minutes and stir them once, maybe even twice, and then add the sauce and let the sauce come to a simmer and cook for a few minutes until the sauce thickens. And then check the Brussels sprouts. If they're not tender yet, you can let them keep cooking, simmering on low to medium until they become tender. You can also use that sauce as a dipping sauce, but if you do, I recommend if you put any of the fresh ingredients like garlic, spring onions, or chilies, or fresh herbs, that you go ahead and use it within several days, because the fresh ingredients will not keep in the fridge as long. Some other things you can do with Brussels sprouts, once you've roasted them or steamed them, you can add them to a burrito or a burrito bowl. They will give some heartiness. You could reduce the rice or other ingredients if you'd like, or you can just make it a very fiber-packed bowl if you'd like, but you can mix it in with anything else that you like to put in your burrito or your burrito bowl. You could put them on burgers. Oftentimes with gourmet burgers, we'll put lettuce or some kind of slaw on top, but you could use these, since they're in season right now, on top of your burgers. Roast them maybe in a sauce that you like with your burger, and then go ahead and put those roasted Brussels sprouts right on top of your burger, and it'll give it some extra flavor as well as some heartiness, and it'll make it nice and satisfying because the Brussels sprouts have lots of fiber. And as I've suggested, you can add them to your favorite soups and stews. You can reduce other ingredients in the soup or the stew, like potatoes or carrots, or those kinds of things that are the denser kinds of vegetables. Or if you have lots of room and it's a very brothy soup, you can just add some Brussels sprouts and it will just make for a thicker soup. So there are lots of things you can do. There are plenty of cookbooks you can borrow from the library or that you might have in your own pantry. You can find things on the internet. One I recommend, there's a new cookbook that came out this fall called the Korean Vegan Cookbook. Even if you're not vegan, you can try this recipe, and it's really tasty. It's called a tofu hot pot. If you don't like tofu, substitute mushrooms instead of the tofu, and you'll get a nice, rich stew type of dish. And if you don't like the tofu and you do eat meat or seafood, you can always serve something else on the side. Or if you don't eat meat and seafood, but you don't like tofu, you can always find another protein to eat on the side. Or you can consider this a meal. There's some protein in the vegetables that go into the hot pot, including the mushrooms, if you do that. But if you like to have more protein, you can add something else on the side. It's really good with mushrooms instead of tofu if tofu isn't your thing. I hope that there have been some helpful tips and ideas for you here and that you're able to enjoy the Brussels sprouts while they're in season right now.